Hey there, you are listening to the Victims and Villains podcast, a podcast that is here to educate and engage individuals like yourselves on mental health awareness and suicide prevention through pop culture. My name is Matthew Basil. I'm one of the co-hosts of the Victims and Villains Animind spinoff podcast. Captain Nostalgia is taking a little break this episode and asked me to fill in on Victims and Villains. On this episode, I will be discussing a YA fantasy novel entitled Goode-Oliver-Dooley and the Palace of Keepers, which is now available in most places books are sold. I have with me the author himself, gerrad-r-bohl. Welcome, Gerrad.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
Oh, yeah, it's a pleasure. I'm a fellow writer, too. I think that's why Captain Nostalgia asked me to do this episode. So I'm going to start off before we get into the book. What drew you personally to writing? What made you kind of want to get into that?
Sure. Well, writing has always been like a therapeutic release or expression for me. Ever since I was like preteens, I started writing poems, poetry. And I was a teacher actually submitted a poem I wrote into a competition, and this was in the early days of internet, so like even before AOL was around, if you can imagine. So
oh wow, okay.
A long time ago, so I don't even know where it is anymore. It's floating out there somewhere, I'm sure, but so I in the ethers, exactly. So I won this competition for this poem, and it was published, and it was used for schools, like teachers could have access to it to teach children how to diagram. So that also tells you how long ago it was, because they don't teach diagramming in schools anymore.
Right.
So it was a tool for them to learn how to diagram sentences and structure sentences, but while also having like a positive moral message to it. So that was kind of like my first entrance into getting a glimpse that I might have a knack for writing. So I always just did it for fun. And then, gosh, I don't even know now, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I literally just woke up, and one of those weird things, I woke up and I was like, I'm going to write a book, and I don't even know how to do it, but I'm going to do it. And there's a story side of me. So that's kind of how I got to start on it. Yeah.
Did you actually have the idea come to you that morning, or did you just kind of have the idea of, hey, I'm going to write something now, I need to figure out what I'm going to write?
Yeah, I had no idea. I literally had no idea. I just knew. I was like, I'm going to write a book, and it's coming, and I don't know what it is even. So I just I talked to a friend. She was a close friend of mine, or is a close friend of mine, and I told her that exact same thing, and she said, what's it going to be about? I said, I have no idea. I said, but I can feel it boiling up now all of a sudden out of nowhere, it seemed like. And so I sat down to kind of decide what it would be that I wanted to do with the book. And the first thing I wanted to do was to create a world that I wanted to be in. I was like, that was like my first starting point. And then from there, I started developing other ideas with it.
I will have to say that this book has a lot of world building, which we'll get into later, of course, and some of the similarities I saw between some other YA novels and books that I'm familiar with. But yeah, you built up a very elaborate world in this book. And so is that what kind of drew you, that you wanted to create a world you wanted to be in, and that's why you wanted to write fantasy, or you just kind of always felt that genre? Or what drew you to that?
I've never been a reader of fantasy. Actually, that's the interesting. Yeah, I enjoy fantasy movies though. Like I've always enjoyed like Lord of the Rings, other worldly places, and interestingly, not even sci-fi, just like really fantasy specific stuff. But I don't read it at all. I love just reading like classical literature, Russian literature. So wow. I mean, nothing fantastical about it other than it's just interesting to me. So yeah, I had no foray, no introduction, I had no idea. I literally had no idea what I was doing when I started it. So
sometimes that's what you got to do. Yeah, and I agree with what you said about finding a world you wanted to be in. I think that's so important. I actually just had a writer earlier today tell me, you got to love your book, whatever you're writing, or short story, whatever you're writing, you got to love it, because if you don't love it, how do you expect anyone else to love it?
Absolutely.
So that makes a lot of sense. And I'm the same way. I write mostly fantasy and some sci-fi too, and some stuff that I guess can be considered kind of a combination of the two. But I agree with you. It's funny that you said that, because I've seen all three of the Lord of the Rings movies. My dad read me The Hobbit when I was like a teenager, I guess, or a young kid, I guess preteen. But I don't think I've never read the Lord of the Rings books. I don't really have any intention to. I just finished reading Dune, which I guess is kind of sci-fi fantasy maybe, but I'm not a huge reader of like the heavy fantasy stuff, but I do love creating worlds and being in those worlds. And like I said, movies I'll definitely watch when like I forget the Tom Cruise one, A Legend, I think it's called. That was from like the 80s. I'm probably dating myself now, but like, those kind of movies always struck with me when you have this kind of very fantastical world. And honestly, as I was reading your book, which is entitled Goode-Oliver-Dooley and the Palace of Keepers, I was visualizing it a lot. It's because it was so elaborate and so otherworldly. I could see it almost like being a movie. There was a lot of visuals in there that you could see. Oh, this would be really cool to see like on a screen. I don't know if you've had those thoughts yourself, but it would be really cool. Like you have a scene with like a moving forest and everything like that. Like, that's be really kind of a cool action sequence to see on film. I don't know if that was your intention to like ever see it on film, or you just were like, I'm just going to write the book and just see where it goes. But
no, totally. I mean, when I wrote it, I started writing it and then I got into writing it further, meaning it was like, I wrote down some ideas, but then I started to develop things. It actually just started to show up in my head as if I was watching something. And so then I would just basically dictate and like narrate what I'm seeing kind of in my head. And so it would be perfect for a film or movie because I almost saw it like that play out in my head as I was writing it. So, yeah.
That's cool. Just one more question about the brain before we actually get into the story here. When you actually had the idea and you saw it in your head, what was the process like from really kind of bringing it from your head down to paper, down to now, then getting it published and to, retailers and stuff?
Oh gosh, what a long process. I'm sure you're aware. Like if just anyone who's listening who's considering being an author, just know, like, do not get into it if you do not have patience at all in your virtues, because every step, every piece of the process takes forever, from thinking about it to actually writing it to editing it to submitting it to publishers or agents, getting someone interested in it to sign, contract review, contract negotiations, and then the production process of going through proofreading and editing phases, and then cover art phase, and then the actual release date. It's such a long process. I can't even tell you.
What was the process? Do you remember, like, from when you first had the first inkling of the idea to when it was finally released? What was that time span?
It was about 3 years. It was about 3 years. So it was, which is pretty quick, actually, I have to say, considering what I've learned about other people's books. And that would be 3 years is a pretty quick turnaround, actually. So from the inception, like when I started writing it, I had like an idea for the introduction, like 3 chapters I had in my head that were pretty clear. Like, this is how I want this story to start. Like, it was pretty clear how I wanted to set the scene, set the tone. But then when I hit the end of the 3rd chapter, I was like, I literally don't even know what's next. I don't know how to even go further. And so then I was like, okay, I don't know how to write. I was like, I don't know how to actually write. So, so what I realized was what I did was I wrote down specific plot points, like 10, 12 major points that I needed to write towards. And what that did is, if I had like 10 or 12 things happening that were major in the story plot, if I could write, what I mean towards it is if I can think about it and drive the story towards that specific point one at a time, then all the pages, all the things filled in kind of a natural order. So I didn't have to worry about what was going to be filled in. It just comes out, kind of, at least for me.
Yeah, I've heard that recommendation too. And I've done that myself, where they even say that there actually might be 12, actually might be the number, but there's a certain, like, a number of plot points that are just typical on all stories, basically. And if you just take your story and just realize what those points are and like kind of map them out, like you said, it becomes kind of a roadmap, and it's like a road trip almost, where you can kind of take a detour and check out this real quick, but you're always heading towards a destination, and then after that destination you head towards the other destination, and you don't know the exact road path. You might, like I said, take detours, you might take breaks and pit stops, but you always kind of know where you're heading, so you know what the final destination is, even if you don't know exactly how you're going to get there. And that's, how you write out the process for the first draft, at least. So that's
how Yeah, that's how it worked for me. And I didn't hear that actually. That was just something
Really.
was just an idea that came to me. I was like, I have to have something to write towards in order for this to move forward. So that was just something that came to me. I didn't actually hear that. It'd be great advice if I had heard that before. I needed like a key as well, because by the third or fourth chapter, I had ideas for characters. And then I was writing the story. I was like, I have forgotten names of people and what they look like and what they sound like and things they've said. So I had to create like a key to follow along, because the story it's a 2-book story. It's part 1 and part 2, and it's a pretty massive story. And there's probably over 75 characters in there.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I was quickly and easily getting lost within my own story.
Yeah, you can do that. I'm writing a novel too. I don't think it has quite that many characters, but it is different worlds. So there's world building and stuff. And I do the same thing. I mean, I have on my computer, I have graphs and outlines and, history, is written down, and all these things to keep the characters straight, what their backgrounds are, where they originated from, and everything like that. So it really is. I mean, people, I don't know. I mean, I didn't realize it, I don't think, before I really started diving into, my novel and, talking to other writers, but it really is a process. Like it's really, you kind of become this crazy person with like, papers posted on your walls and all these graphs and maps and everything, especially if you do something like a high fantasy or a very, sophisticated sci-fi world. I'm just finished Dune about a month or two ago. And I mean, I have no idea how Frank Herbert even did that. I don't know if you ever read Dune or anyone else out there read Dune, but I mean, there's just so many terms and stuff that he uses in that book. I mean, he must have had, he must have filled his walls with like a dictionary, like, that he was referencing.
Yeah. I even had a character that at one point I turned into a twin, because it was easier to turn the character into a twin because I had forgotten which name I gave the person. And so I was like, I'm just going to make this person a twin and give them the 2 names, because I keep interchanging, because I keep forgetting which name I give the person. So some people might think, oh, yeah, there's a twin for like some kind of metaphorical reason, but no, it's literally a tactic, because I couldn't remember.
Happy accident. No one has to know.
Exactly.
Except for our listeners will know, but no one else reading will have to know. Why don't you give a synopsis of what the book is, so our listeners can know what we're talking about, then we'll get into kind of the characters in the story.
Sure. So Goode-Oliver-Dooley is a boy, probably I envisioned him around like 10 years old, mature for his age, because usually someone in these circumstances is forced into maturity. And he was taken as an infant from his biological parents, and he's heir to a throne of this magical kingdom. And he was placed in the care of these 2 people that adopted him, and they were paid. And so, of course, they didn't love him. They did it for the money. And they are just vile, despicable people. And he is basically given a death sentence. He is supposed to be living out like a premature death in the care of these people, kind of like a slow, torturous death, basically. But he keeps surviving, and he ends up like living up to 10, 11 years old, but his light inside is dimming. Someone can only take such a condition for so long. So then he suddenly happens upon this magazine, and it's an invite to this royal garden competition. And he has to find this special plant, not just any plant, of course. And he has to go to this greenhouse area that's kind of hidden from plain view, but it exists. And he has to find this special plant, raise it, enter this competition. And he meets like 10 other competitors that are all around his age, give or take a few years. And there's several hundred entries, but 10 kids win a spot in this kingdom as like they think it's like a royal gardener. So they're going to learn how to garden and stuff, but they turn out to be keepers. And so that's why it's Goode-Oliver-Dooley in the Palace of Keepers, because in this magical kingdom, bees are the form of wealth and currency, not money. And everyone in the palace is essentially, their role is to serve and to take care of bees, because bees are sort of vital to existence, which is the case for our world as well. And so he gets to this kingdom, and he finds out through a series of events that he's heir to the throne, which is why he was taken. And there is a villain whose name is Odilum. And Odilum has the ability to infect people's minds and then cause them to take their own life. And Odilum, as many of the characters in the story are, the name comes from a plant or like a flower. So odolum comes from the odolum tree in India, which is synonymous, or it's used for suicide a lot in India. And so odolum's name comes from that plant, and that's his power. And there's only one youth that succumbs to that power and jumps off a cliff. And that's the most, you could say, act of self-harm. Like people, the challenge with this book was getting people interested in it, because suicide in youth is a no-no, because there's mental health help for teens, young adults, but for children around Doyle-Oliver's age, 10, it's a no-no topic. You don't talk about it. And that's a problem, I think. And so that's kind of why I built that into the storyline. Goode-Oliver eventually has to confront that demon because odolum possesses his mind in the second book. So to let people know that there are no acts of self-harm upon children in this story at all, because it's not meant to traumatize anyone. It's meant to be a fantastical story told in a way that children can read it and say, oh, this is that villain's voice in my head that is meaning to do me harm, and it's not who I am. And so that's kind of how the story kind of evolved, in how I wanted to utilize a purpose greater than just having a fun story to tell, to help children see that there is, in adults and teens and in kids, this voice that is meaning to do them harm, that isn't their own voice. It's societal voice. It's bully's voice. It could be parents' voice, that is a tape that's replaying in their head. So that's kind of how the story evolves. And then in the first book, the story is basically half told. And in the second book, it gets really into the nitty gritty with confronting odolum, the villain. And that kind of escalates until, odolum goes to the kingdom and is going to confront goode-oliver-dooley face to face. And then there's the end of the book, which I don't want to say, of course, but
I definitely want to get back into the concepts of odolum and playing the tapes in our heads and feeling like we need to do self-harm. This is a Victims and Villains podcast. But before we get into that, we'll talk more about the story. And I do want to let any listeners know that, I agree with you. This is very much for kids. There isn't really any violence. It has to me, it had a very Harry Potter feel, but more of the earlier Harry Potter before it got kind of darker in the last few. There's definitely a darkness with odolum there, what odolum's palace is like, and obviously that villain there. But it's not like a violent. It's not like Hunger Games or something like that, where kids are killing each other left and right, and it's nothing like that. So it is definitely for kids, but also I think it can be enjoyable for adults too, and has a good message. But I wanted to go back to the Goode-Oliver's adoptive parents, Mavis Lumpin is how at least is that it? Okay, did I get it? And Herman Lumpin. Oh my God. I couldn't stand those two characters. I hope you did not channel them off of somebody who you knew in real life. You don't have to say whether you do it or not, but those characters, because they're in probably, I guess, the third of the first book, maybe to almost a half. And I was just I not in a bad way necessarily, but I just couldn't wait till you got rid of them. I was like, I do not want to deal with these people anymore. They really had, I guess you were trying to put as much harm and neglect and darkness, I guess, for lack of a better term, onto Goode-Oliver with those two characters as you could.
Yeah, that's this exposition to really set the tone and to color what his life was like. And the interesting the thing for me anyway is as a writer creating that process, to color his existence with so much darkness that it was literally bleak. And when you and I'm sure you probably picked it up, but when you enter this new kingdom, you notice how vibrant everything becomes and bright and colorful. And it's the opposite of where he was at. But I had to color that darkness with all of that, what you said, these idiosyncrasies, these characteristics that are synonymous with darkness, so that it was clear that there's a contrast that's very clear between what light and dark energy looks like.
Yeah, and that, like I said, definitely came through with those two characters. I guess you didn't read Harry Potter. You're not a Harry Potter fan, even though I saw some similarities, and not in a way where I felt like you were ripping off Harry Potter, but in a way where I think fans of the Harry Potter series would like your book, because I know Harry Potter, was adopted by parents who were, kind of cruel and made him live under the stairs. But I don't think they were even quite as bad as Mavis and Herman here. So I think Goody Oliver had it worse than Harry Potter did, in my opinion. But others can beg to differ. Where did you come up with the name Goode-Oliver-Dooley too? That was an interesting name, I thought.
Yeah. So his name is, if you say his name, the first two parts, good and then Oliver, you say it, he's good all over.
Oh,
because he's innately good. Like that's his innate being. And then Dooley is, I believe it's Irish, or it's Northern for dark king, because he goes through this great darkness before he becomes king. So spoiler alert, he becomes king. And he goes through great darkness. So good Oliver Dooley, and his initials are God. Not because he is God, but because he emulates God light, like lightness and hope and joy. And so that was why I named him that way. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I did not pick up on that level. So that's very interesting that name had, because I thought it was an interesting name, but I couldn't figure out why you had such a, this name here, because it in the story, at least, it doesn't seem to play any part, at least in the first part. Like, so I only read, the first half, because that's all it's out so far. But, so I was just curious where that name comes from, but that's really interesting. I love when there's subtextual layers. I try to put those in my own writing as well. So there's like Easter eggs that you can kind of find a little deeper symbolism, understanding symbolism. So that's nice. That's interesting. And I also like the fact that in this story, or more so when they obviously get into the magical kingdom and the palace of keepers, is that, there's a royal court and everything like that, and there's lords and ladies. And I thought was really nice was that it was kind of a mix of both male and female figures of authority and heroic and villainous figures. It wasn't all kings and knights and, all the male figures as the heroes, and the women were subservient. They were, I think the Lord Chancellor is a female, right? Who's kind of like the head of the castle, since the king is dead. Spoiler alert. So the Lord Chancellor kind of runs the palace, who is a female, and Lady Iris is a major character. But then you also have Nautilus. Nautilus, is that how you say his name?
Nautilus, yeah.
Nautilus, there you go. Yeah, so it was I thought it was just nice to just see that. At least to me, it didn't come across like you were really even taking gender into consideration. You were just kind of picking and developing characters, which I think is the best way to do that. Just develop strong characters, both male and female. And I like that aspect of your story a lot.
Thanks. Yeah, it was important for Chancellor in particular. She has Tilda Swinton. Honestly, I want her to play that character. and I wrote it specifically, that character. When I saw that character, I saw her. So, and she is so androgynous, beautifully androgynous. And so anyway, so Lord Chancellor's female, that's her gender, but her pronoun essentially is Lord.
That's true.
Because she chooses that. It doesn't really talk about that. Yeah, she doesn't. I don't bring that up really as like a thing that's addressed in the story, but just so that's essentially, if we could translate it to that world, she chooses Lord as her pronoun. So
that's interesting. Yeah. No, I didn't pick up on that, but you're right now thinking back on that. So it was just like I said, it was an interesting way of just showing, I guess, the diversity and everything like that, which I thought really well done with that.
Thank you.
And nice to see. And I also, speaking of another, not that there weren't male characters too, I'll get to my two favorite male characters in a moment, but the other female character I really liked was the Oracle. I don't know if she's going to make an appearance in the second book, but I liked the Oracle, how just straightforward she was, and all the magic stuff and all the stuff in her home and everything like that. It was a really cool scene. Probably that and the part where they're in like the moving forest were probably like the two scenes that I was like, I would love to see this in like some kind of visual world.
Yeah, Oracle does make an appearance in the second book. She's
good.
She's an important character for sure. And in the moving forest, I'm glad you really enjoyed that, because that was it was two things: really fun to create and very challenging to create. Because I had the idea, but I was like, how do I describe this thing? Like, how do I describe what's happening here? And the idea came from, I studied anthropology in college I didn't finish that as my degree, but I studied it for several years. And I remember one of my professors saying he went down to the Amazon or South America, and he remember seeing trees that would climb down, so their leaves would migrate down towards the ground to obtain water, and then their roots would uproot themselves and then become the new leaves. So they would be walking. They would be walking towards water. And I remember thinking, like, I could just envision like these trees basically just flipping themselves as they walk, and they are essentially migrating. So I'm going to take that idea and just make this trees in this forest all do that in their own kind of way, like swinging limbs. And yeah, anyway, so that's what kind of inspired that idea.
That was really cool. And I also, to the two male characters, not that I didn't like goode-oliver-dooley and, and everything like that, but I gotta say the two male characters that stood out to me is Nautilus, as I said, was he kind of had just this very dapper knight quality, but rogue and, played by his own rules, but was a gentleman as well. So I enjoyed his character, and I really enjoyed Sebastian, who was his goode-oliver's, I guess, best friend, or you were shaping him up to be the best friend. And I just love, because some of his like eye rolls and like expressions when they went, because some of the stuff they were doing in the book as like, part of the festivities of the palace was like, I was like, wow, this seems like really dangerous, or like this is something I would not like doing. And I just could put myself in Sebastian's shoes so much, being like, what are you talking about? Now I got to climb up this vine and that's 100 feet in the air and swing across. Why would you have me do this? So I enjoyed Sebastian a lot.
Oh, good. He's one of my, and it's funny, he's actually one of my favorite characters too. And the reason, and it's funny, I didn't know this. This is like a writing device, again, that I just was like, this probably needs to happen because, like you said, there's so many outrageously dangerous things that they're doing. Yes. There has to be a voice that the audience can be like, hey, wait a second, that's crazy. And so the story has to have that element of someone inside going, hey, that's crazy, so that the audience can be like, see, I'm not the only one who thinks it's crazy. And I don't know what that device is called, but I've heard of it. And so that's kind of what Sebastian is. He's like the audience sympathizer or empathizer. And I just had so much fun playing with him, in the sense of playing with his reactions to the craziness that was happening. Like when he gets covered in the bird droppings. Yes. Oh, and he is like, of course he would be, not anyone else, but right. He would be. And I had such fun. It made me laugh when I was writing it, in those kind of moments. So
yeah, his moments were the moments that made me laugh too. I mean, they were the most comical. I definitely enjoyed him, and definitely felt his pain a lot. I felt sorry for him, and he was one of the characters that definitely pulled me in. And speaking of characters, I did, and again, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but like, were you putting any of yourself in these characters, or was any character? Because I know some authors say that they put themselves or people they know in their books. I myself feel like, when I write, a little piece of me is in every single character, which I've heard some other authors say as well. Were you doing that, or were you just simply pulling these characters out of your head and just envisioning what you felt needed to be in this world?
Yeah, it's a mix. Yeah, majoritively it is, especially the children, the 10 kids that get selected to go, they each represent an element of myself, for sure. Goode-Oliver-Dooley is, of course, the most mature and balanced, and the most focused and the most sensitive. And then sassy Sebastian, like that's the part of my personality. Like he is my unfiltered voice. And then there's the other characters like Lillian or Hortensia. They all have certain strengths that are, magnifying parts of me. And then other things too, like the more villainous people, they represent bad parts of me, just like anyone else. Like if I don't have myself in good orderly direction or in checking myself, I could become one of these monstrous people. Anyone could. So mostly from myself. The other filter I use is, how is it serving the story overall? Like, how is this character's traits adding or taking away. If it's taking away, I need to change something. If it's adding to the plot and the story, then that's great. So that's the kind of the second filter. And if there's something needed, then I can add it,
Yeah. No, and that's very wise, I think, and mature, and makes for better stories when we can see that kind of the shadow aspects of ourselves, and understand that those are part of us. And if they overtake us, then, we could become a monster, like you said. I think that's the appropriate way, to phrase that. But maybe the shadow aspects also can serve a purpose, in certain situations, but, as long as we keep them in check. And I definitely saw it with the characters, that the kids, especially, because every child, except for maybe Goode-Oliver, as you said, who's probably the most pure and balanced, but every kid, I think, in that story has this aspect that if they did let it overtake them, which you indicated towards the end that, one or two of the kids are kind of letting it overtake them. If they let that aspect overtake them, they would kind of become a villain almost in the story, even though they, have this little aspect that if they can keep in check, then it could be an asset amongst the group if they, work together. So, which I thought was interesting. I don't know if that's something that's going to be developed in the second story, but I kind of picked up on that and thought that would be an interesting thing to see.
You'll see that in the second story because, as you know, in the first one of those kids succumbs to that dark force, and then it takes him. And there's another kid who is susceptible. And in the second book, I created it intentionally because this can happen too. He changes his heart. And so so he becomes an ally instead of a villain. And that can happen in life too. So, yeah.
And that's nice to see too, because it's shown in media too sometimes when there's redemption. But a lot of times we see when a character is presented with a certain negative, or what's widely considered a negative trait, we usually say, oh, okay, well, they're going to eventually get corrupted by that, and we're going to see their downfall and everything like that. So it's nice to see someone having a negative trait and showing how they could overcome that and really kind of redeem and be an asset.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below, wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
I have to also say too, this, to let listeners, we're not doing video, to let the listeners know, this, what I also found fascinating by this book was the plants in it, because the Palace of Keepers, as you said, they use bees as currency, but they're all about plants. It's all about kind of pollination and the plant world. And I know you said, I guess in your about author thing, I think I read it there, you said, you take a lot of inspiration from nature, which I do as well. And I just was very astounded because I personally, I got to say, if you had told me, hey, I'm going to write a book about, a kingdom of basically gardeners, people who take care of plants, I'd be like, and this is going to be a YA fantasy action thing? Like, okay, plants, like, really? But you made it interesting. did you have knowledge? Do you have like a lot of knowledge of plants? Are the plants that we see in the story? Because I honestly, I mean, I know some stuff about plants because, like I say, I do have an interest in nature, but I'm not sure. Were these plants like real plants that exist in the world, or based off real plants in the world, or were you just purely using your imagination, or was it some hybridization? Because you actually do make it very interesting with all these different plants and all these ceremonies they have around them, and there's carnivorous plants that sound very scary. It's at one point. So I was very curious to see where you got that inspiration from.
Yeah, I'd say like 99% of the plants used in the story are actually real. They're actually real plants. Yeah. And their scale, the size of them, is not real. So essentially, I've taken what already exists, because I mean, our world is unfathomably beautiful and mysterious and intensely diverse with so many types of plants and animals. And I didn't need to invent anything. That was the really fun and interesting thing when I started writing the story. And I was like, I want these plants to do this and this. I'm like, I don't think I even need to invent them. I think they already exist. And so all it was me just looking up and just researching, basically. Wow. I knew about simple flowers, basic flowers, but I didn't know anything about carnivorous plants. And so what I did was created an obstacle course, essentially, with those, and that these, they have to learn how to be teammates together as they go through this obstacle course. And I just kind of envisioned what I wanted the obstacle course to do. And then I was like, there has to be a plant that does something similar. And then I would just try and find one that existed. And then I just blew it up to otherworldly proportions, making it larger than life so that it was scarier, more intense, the stakes are higher.
Yeah. I mean, that's why, as I was reading, especially that what you referenced with the obstacle course, as I was reading the obstacle course scene, I was like, these plants don't really exist, right? Otherwise I'm a little more scared of nature than I was, but that makes, I mean, some of them, like I could kind of, because again, I do have some limited knowledge of plants, not like you, not much about carnivorous plants, but I was like, some of these sound familiar to some carnivorous plants I know that obviously don't pose threats to humans, but eat insects and like small, mammals and lizards. But I was like, so I got these probably enlarging nose, but then some others I was like, I never heard of this. This sounds even, worse than some of the other carnivorous plants I heard. So but I agree with you. I mean, the world is so full of stuff that it was beyond what we could even imagine anyway. So that was interesting because, again, as someone who does have some limited knowledge of plants, I'm not going to say I'm a herbalist or anything like that, but, has some limited knowledge of nature and plants, I found it a very fantastical world still. So someone who really does not know much at all about plants, aside from, trees and roses out there, will probably just really get blown away by some of these creatures that you have in this book. Because I know I was. So
cool. Yeah. Like one of the carnivorous plants they have to crawl through that has barbs in it. That
was the one that really freaked me out. Actually, that's the one I'm referencing here. This better not exist or be an enlarged thing. Because if so, I'm going to find out where this does exist and never ever go there.
It's far small. No human could crawl through one. It's very small. It's like an insect could crawl and get lost in it. And that's it.
I was saying this is real. I'm never going like within 100-mile radius of where this plant exists.
And then it belches, and then of course Sebastian is like, I'm out of here. This is not okay.
Oh yeah, that was one of the moments where I was like, if I'm Sebastian, I just run. I'm like, you know what? Just give me the money. I'm out. I'll see you guys later. Good luck with all your bees and everything. Before we get into kind of the mental health themes, the psychological themes, I definitely want to talk about, because there's a lot here, and obviously this is a Victims and Villains podcast, so of course we're going to talk about them. But I just wanted to had to ask again. We know, obviously, like you just said, you took the influences from nature into creating these plants, and you had kind of the obviously the mental health aspects you wanted to get across. Were there any other influences that you had? Because me reading this book, like I said, Harry Potter screamed at me. Again, not saying you ripped off Harry Potter, but it just screamed to me like this is like similar to Harry Potter, and the fact that we have these kids in this very fantastical world and this lost king or chosen one that has to kind of set things right. And Odilum reminded me a little bit of Voldemort and is very odious. And the fact that he's not really very present in this book, but kind of always a shadow or a cloud hanging over the characters reminded me a lot of, again, the earlier books of Harry Potter, where Voldemort's a little less prevalent because he hasn't refound his body and all that. There's also a little bit of Bridge to Terabithia, I felt like, also in here too, and the fact that we have the children involved in this kind of fantastical world that's very nature oriented and everything like that. So, but I didn't know if you had any kind of influences that you took from.
Not as far as like other authors or other stories, not really. It's all pretty much my own. Like, for example, the green bees, the bee that stings Oliver in the beginning. I was stung by a green bee when I was around Oliver's age. And I've never seen a green bee since. They exist. They're real.
No, I didn't even know. I thought that was completely made up for the story. See,
nope. And it's an actual real event. Like, that actually happened to me. Wow. So yeah, I didn't pass out and wake up in a field of flowers that suddenly appeared, but but I mean, that was something, an actual event that happened to me that I was able to, transform into an element of this fantasy story. So like I was saying at the beginning, I love Russian literature, like, for example, Tolstoy, because not only is he like a historian, that's what he is first, but his later works like Anna Karenina, he's so beautifully descriptive with his prose. Like, I feel like I'm in a Russian garden when he is describing it. And that influenced me for sure. His writing is so beautiful. I tried to definitely emulate and to capture that feeling. Like, when I read read his books, I wanted to like transport, the readers into that world the way he did for me, into that Russian society. Even like in the ballrooms, I could feel the air, the warmth of the air, because everyone is heated. It's hot in there, and there's perfume because the women are dancing around, and I could smell it and hear the music and feel the heat in the room and the candles glowing. That's what I get when I read Tolstoy. And so I definitely wanted to take that same quality and put it into my writing.
I think you did that because we said when we were setting up this interview, I thought you lived in England because it's, the story's set in England, if I remember correctly, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the palace is obviously this magical world that we're unaware of as humans, but like Goody Oliver's originally in England. Everyone's having tea and biscuits, and it has this, they're in this palace where there's a lot of elegant ballrooms and there's elegant breakfast meals and grand dinners and everything like that. I think that's what really made me recall Harry Potter was those kind of scenes where they're having these like lavish ball parties and dinners and everything like that. And so you definitely transported you into this other culture, or at least you did for me as the reader, transported into this other culture that was very lavish. And like I said, that's why I thought you were from England. I thought you were British because I'm like, oh, well, he reminds me so much of like the royal, what I know of, which is very limited, but I mean, what I know of the royal family and, the high tea at noon and all that in England. I mean, I've never been to England myself.
Oh, yeah, I've been several times. That's why I hoped to be able to do it justice. Like, I was scared. I was really scared because I was never born there. I've only visited a few times and I love it. I mean, whenever I'm there, I feel like I'm at home actually. And so that was my fear, actually. I was like, I hope I do England justice because this is my observations. And I can say I'm an anthropologist, which is just, anthropology, a cultural anthropologist studies cultures. And so if I learned anything from my studies, I learned how to study nuances of culture. So I hope that came through as well, as far as a skill that I could add to the writing. But there's so many other things that I took in my own life. For example, Crimson Time is their own version of Christmas time, obviously. Right. And the blindfolded cookie decorating that they do, that's something I invented with my family. Yeah, it's something that I came up with as a holiday game for us and the kids. And it was just so much fun. We would fall over and we'd be laughing hysterically, and the cookies were a mess, like nothing like it. So I was like, oh, I'm going to give them this tradition because this is something I created. So yeah, all that stuff it's like just my own imagination too in that regard. So.
Oh yeah. Well, I I will say I've never been to England, but for someone who's never been to England, just limited knowledge from, some British movies I've seen and stuff, it felt like the British movies. I've watched some British TV shows, Ab Fab and Margaret and Bob and stuff, and Mr. Bean when I was a kid. And, I've seen like Four Weddings and a Funeral and stuff like that. So at least from that limited experience I have of movies and television from England, it definitely felt like you did capture that. I don't know if somebody who, like I said, lived in England and was born there would maybe feel differently. But yeah, I felt like you gave it justice. Like I said, I would have, if you tried to convince me you were born in England, I would have believed you. So, and I did, like I said, that's the cookie thing was one. I mean, all those traditions you put, I think just does give that. It's again, going back to Dune, again is, and I know you said you didn't read it, but it's similar in that aspect where you're building the world by putting these kind of rituals and these terms and these traditions that they have in place already. So it makes you feel like you are in a fully realized culture. You are in a fully realized world, which I thought was really well done in this book.
Thank you.
So we will move on to, I guess, the mental health themes, which you said when you were describing what's there, that this, obviously has the idea of self-harm and combating self-harm. Odilum, represents kind of self-harm or suicide even. And which I thought, like you said, was brave to put into this, because kids can suffer from depression too, just as easily as adults. It can affect all of us, especially if you're brought up. Unfortunately, there are probably people who are in situations similar to what Goode-Oliver is in at the beginning of this book, which is very sad to say. But when you're brought up in an abusive situation like that, it's very easy to succumb to ideas of self-harm and depression. And so to see that played out in here was, I thought, in a kind of a symbolic way that wasn't too heavy for kids, but something that was, very much, at least subconsciously, I think, realized, even if you're a young kid, meaning like 10, like Goode-Oliver's age. I thought it was really interesting and really well done how you did that.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a challenge, and it was so enriching to be able to do it. Yeah.
Was it a coping mechanism for you as well with, any struggles you have with mental health or have had with mental health?
Yeah. I didn't have that coping mechanism at that age, because I was 10 when I first started experiencing what you would call suicidal ideation. And I didn't have the coping skill that Goode-Oliver eventually learns in the story, as far as separating himself from that voice and naming that voice as like, that is not me. I didn't have that. I didn't learn that until I was an adult, after I've gone through therapy and stuff and had been taught that. So yeah, I dealt with suicidal ideation at a very young age, and then in different varying degrees of severity, depending on how depressed or how uprooted or stressful life became. Can be worse in some cases and alleviated in some cases. To cut to now, I'm almost 40, and the thoughts visit once in a while, but I have so many tools and coping skills to understand what those thoughts are. And even though this is written for children, that same principle applies for adults too. It's a voice that means you harm, and it's not yours. It's not yours. It's a conglomeration of tapes of, what you hear in society or what Instagram is telling you, or and then you either believe it or you don't. I've
had, especially over the last 10, 15 years, have worked myself very hard to try to get rid of those tapes that I had, just from, again, like you said, that you just pick them up from either society, from your family background, from media. You have these tapes that you're, not good enough, that there's something wrong with you, that you're a failure, that whatever it is that is our tape. And, we all have our own library, I think, or a lot of us do. I mean, I've definitely. I've met a lot of people who do, and bless you if you don't have that, and you've managed to make it through this life without getting any tapes played over in your head about that you're not worthy, basically, in some sense. We have this, we just, as humans, we seem to have this kind of inclination that we're not worthy, or we're less than worthy of this life, of what we have, of the joy that's inherited in life. And this is why I personally, I don't know if this is, what drew you to it or how you felt, but this is why I tend to write a lot of sci-fi fantasy, because a lot of times when I tell people I'm a writer, I say I write sci-fi fantasy. Sometimes, people are like, oh, okay, so you just write superhero stuff. Like it's kind of a, like, oh, okay, well, you just write light stuff. It's, not really, but it's the sci-fi fantasy umbrella. And I'm going to extend this as far out to include horror and include superheroes and all those genres, I think can speak so much to these ideas that we have of like the tapes playing in our heads of not having self-worth, of looking towards, how do we live this life here that seems so difficult sometimes, or that seems like it's scary, or that we're set up for failure, or that I'm not good enough. And I think sci-fi fantasy allows you to access them in a kind of a subtle way that is more effective. It's almost more real than if you were to just write a story about a child who was in an abusive home and struggling with suicide. It would almost become too heavy for children. But having now this child who's in this, again, Mavis and Herman are so horrible, but they're almost like they almost get to the point of cartoonishly horrible, right? Because they're just so horrible. And then he's in this fantasy world where he has to, overcome this literal, I guess, like sorcerer or evil sorcerer who can, enter his head. I think is so much more accessible to say, oh, okay, like even if they don't click it consciously, subconsciously, it gets that message across. I don't know if, like I said, you found that, but that's what I always believed.
Yeah. And that's how I was like, this is the only way I can really do this story, I think, this way. Yeah. Because like you said, it would be too heavy to make it like a literal thing.
When I used to take medicine, I hated medicine before I took pills when I was a little kid, and I would have to take the medicine, drink it. I hate the taste of it, so it's kind of like you put it in a little applesauce and you take it that way. And it's kind of this bitter story that's quite dark when you really look at this. We're just talking Goode-Oliver-Dooley in the Palace of Keepers. When you look at that as just this boy who's grown up in this abusive relationship and now has to face this person who can literally, make him take his own life, that's a very dark story. But you put it into such a fantastical world and put in so many crazy characters, and by crazy I mean like very colorful and very lively, and like Sebastian and Nautilus and the Oracle, who's very eccentric, and you put in these colorful characters and this, trees roaming around and running around, these like carnivorous plants. So it kind of becomes the applesauce to take this bitterness in.
I forgot to address that because you mentioned you liked Nautilus so much.
Nautilus, sorry.
That's okay, yeah. So he and the other Sagwards, because they're older than the newcomers, they are essentially mentors, or kind of like big brothers or big sisters to the newcomers. And I love that element because, like you said, it's like this necessary thing in life that helps people because you just need someone to believe in you. And those Sagwards, like that's their job, is to believe in their young keeper and to mentor them and to guide them, because we all need that, at least one person to do that. It doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't have to be a parent. It'd be great if it is, but it doesn't have to be. And so that's kind of what they represent. And it's like a medicine wrapped in this lovely package so that it doesn't feel like medicine.
You're right. We all need someone, especially, I think at any point in our life, but especially when we're going through struggles. And unfortunately, sometimes it can be hard to find. Sometimes, unfortunately, you can't rely on a parent, which is why, Victims and Villains is here to try to speak hope and bridge that gap for people. Because I think a lot of people who are in that situation, then they look towards the fantasy, pop culture, sci-fi worlds, for some kind of escapism or some kind of maybe person who they can emulate. And that's, why we do what we do here at Victims and Villains. And if you are listening and you are in a struggling situation, you are looking for your Nautilus to believe in you, the first step is to reach out and let people know you need help. And you can check out the mental health resource library at victimsandvillains.net, where you can go to at least get a head start and try to start getting some help.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
You also had some wonderful quotes in here that I just loved. And I just, before we wrap up here, I just wanted to kind of go over them. First off, and I'm sorry, I'm going to probably butcher this. For those of you who also listen to Adamind, you know that I have trouble pronouncing words that I am not familiar with. But that's a running gag on Adamind. And I don't have Danny or Graham here to help me. So you're going to have to do this. Oath of Levulus. Is that how you say it?
Levulus.
Okay. Oath of Levulus, which is, I'm just going to read it here, just so, and then we can discuss it. It's an oath they take in the story, and it's, I vow to behave in a manner which is at all times respectable, honorable, and noble. I recognize that to be noble, I do not endeavor to be better than another, but to be a better version only of myself each new day. I vow to protect and respect all physical, emotional, and spiritual conditions, be they mine or of another. I vow to meet my obligations with openness and humility, knowing that my position here is one of service. I accept that the sacrifices I must make to uphold this oath will make and keep me free. May we rise by lifting each other higher. Is this like your creed that you kind of try to live by?
Yeah, it definitely is. It's, I've had people like Nautilus in my life, and I've been blessed and fortunate to have that. And those are the sort of life lessons that I have learned from such people. And I tried to encapsulate them into a single oath, because that oath wasn't given to me that way. It's like a conglomeration of things I've learned over my life from other people who have spiritual and emotional strength that I look up to, and kind of boil it down to essentially, this is what they've taught me.
If the listeners are interested there, so they can read the book and get this, oath in front of them. But that's why I wanted to read it, because there's so much great stuff in here that is similar to other stuff I have seen, but the way you kind of turn the phrase and certain wording you use, I really liked how you did it. Like how you said that, I recognize that to be noble, I do not endeavor to be better than another, but to be a better version only of myself each new day. Because I think this comes from, media and society a lot. We feel like we're always in competition with one another. And so it's such a nice way to say that's, it's to be the best version of yourself that you can be in each day, and that can change. And I just love that. And to respect all physical, emotional, and spiritual conditions, be they mine or another. Again, the respect. And I think I said this in one of our Adamind episodes. I think we talked about this, that respect is such a key. You hear love a lot, and love is definitely needed, but respect is somewhat of a different flavor sometimes than love. And there's a slight nuance, I feel, and sometimes it's missed, that there's a respect, meaning that maybe I don't agree with what you necessarily do or believe or stand for, but I respect your, right to have that, and I'm not going to infringe on it, and, you're not going to infringe on mine, and it's just kind of a mutual sharing, even if we're not really existing in the same sphere, or at least in this certain circumstance or situation. And I just thought that was really nice way to put in there as well.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's true, because love, like you said, kind of what I see too is respect is an ingredient, to love.
It is.
It's an ingredient.
It is. And a lot of times when we hear love, we feel like romantic love, or like the love one feels for, their dog or cat, or their child, or their parent, or their brother, sister, or significant other. And, and respect is definitely an ingredient of it, but it's sometimes I think missed, at least I had personal experiences where I felt like that was missed, where it's kind of like, okay, well, just because I don't agree with you doesn't mean that, I don't respect that. And I, can still see you as an individual, as a another fellow human being, or even another living entity, even non-humans, that has a right to exist in this world and to live their life.
Yeah, and that was kind of definitely a point, is because they are there. Their purpose in that kingdom is to make sure that these bees are taken care of. Because literally, like it can't be more clear either that their survival is literally dependent on those bees surviving, and which is not like some sort of legend myth or anything. That is our literal situation in this world. So yeah,
and it kind of comes back to how you ended that oath, which is, we rise by lifting each other higher. And I think that's it's so easy when I've met people like this, and I was like this too, where you're kind of drilled into that you have to fit into a certain box, and you don't quite fit into that box, and then you become resentful. You can at least become resentful of others. You can become because you're not allowed to be yourself, or you're resentful of others because they're not they have it easier, you feel like, because they're more typical, normal, quote unquote, or you can become kind of this rebel without a cause, and because you just aren't allowed to be yourself, and you're just kind of fighting whatever you can fight. And it's so easy to fall into those traps where you make enemies out of others. And I think it's, again, how you ended that oath, was that we're all trying to help rise each other. And I thought that was really nice, and plays in with the whole bee theme that you had there as well.
Yeah, thanks.
For those of you who listen to Atomine, you can hear more about this when we do our My Neighbor Totoro episode. But it's not just even humans; it's also nature too, as part of a community that we have to exist in. So I thought that was a nice theme you had in there. The other quotes that I really liked was, "As long as you continue to fear the past, it will dominate you," which just spoke so much to me, because, again, we can be so controlled by our past experiences, especially if you come from not really a healthy upbringing or background. Then you end up fearing it, and it as long as you fear it, it controls you. So I thought that was such a nice way to phrase that it will dominate you if you fear the past.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's so true.
You had another one: failures are gateways to learning, growth, and eventual improvement, which I thought I've heard said otherwise, but this is a different way of saying it, which is great, that we learn by failure. We learn by failing. And again, at least I picked up in society this perfectionist attitude that we're all in competition with one another, and we can't fail. We go to school and we can't get an F, we can't fail the test. And otherwise, we're going to get grounded, or we're going to get in trouble with teachers and all that. And I mean, it's one thing to fail a test because you just blow it off because you don't want to take responsibility for it. But I mean, it's another thing to fail because you really just didn't get the material. And I think, that sometimes gets missed, that again, nuance of difference.
Yeah. My whole point with that too is I might actually go into another book, but essentially failure should be celebrated. Because, like you said, there's one thing to literally blow off your responsibilities. That's a choice to just fail. That's a different thing we're talking about for sure. We're talking about like an honest, earnest effort, and then you don't meet what it is you were hoping to meet, some sort of expectation or plan, and you failed, quote unquote, failed, and that should be celebrated, because humans only learn that way.
Yeah.
Like that you watch other people fail and you learn, you fail yourself and you learn. So yeah, it's unfortunate that whatever starting point that was, where failure became a dirty word, and it should never have. Yeah,
I agree. Absolutely. Two more, I would say, quotes that I really like. People must experience the dignity of their actions and choices, which again kind of goes back to what we just said. When you make a choice to fail, then that's your choice. So you're free to make that choice. But and you experience the dignity. I liked how you used the word dignity. That's what really stood out to me, because you experience whatever that is, whatever the results are of that. And you have to, whether that's you have to experience the dignity of your choices. Because again, like you said, that's failure. That's how you learn, in a way, because that's kind of not the failure like we were talking about, where you make an earnest effort and you fail and you learn. But when you make a choice to blow off your responsibilities and you fail, then by kind of reaping the repercussions of that is also a failure. And you learn that might have not been the right choice to make.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's character developing. So dignity, it's dignifying to fail when there's been an honest effort. It's dignifying because it teaches you not just a literal lesson like, oh, I need to do this instead next time. It also teaches humility, and humans without humility are vile creatures. So,
yeah, they're difficult for sure.
So let people fail, get out of the way, let them have the dignity of their consequences, because it's going to give them character. It's going to teach them how to be better.
Yeah, I think when we encapsulate people in a bubble where they can't fail, like you said, it diminishes their potential. Absolutely. Listeners probably pick up a theme here in this book. The last quote is, "Life isn't about declining the cards we're dealt, but playing our hand the best we can," which I love that, because I, personally in my life right now, I'm kind of, how do I put this? I'm that's not going to get too personal, but I'm kind of maybe being a little resentful of the cards that I'm dealt right now, and I think that's common. I don't think I'm the only one who's probably found themselves in that situation. But, you have to, and what I've been telling myself is that I just have to, take these cards and just make what I can of them. And not kind of just throw a temper tantrum and storm off or start complaining that I was dealt this hand, but try to make the best of it. Because life is going to deal us cards that we're not really prepared for. John Lennon said life is what happens when we're making other plans. It's never... it's never what we plan, it's what we're dealt.
Yeah, and it's hard. It's easier said than done. Like,
Certainly.
Take it easy. Take it easy on yourself, because, there's 7 years ago, I was literally at the top of I was doing a lot of modeling and I was doing acting in LA, and it just crashed down. I lost everything. I became homeless. I declared bankruptcy. I had to start over at a point that was not my plan. And that was the card I was dealt. And I had to start all over in life. And it was so hard to get up every day, not knowing what was going to happen. Like, I have to do something with these cards that I was just dealt. And I went back to school, finished my degree. I started writing this book, which probably never would have been written if that big catastrophic thing hadn't happened in my life. I went on to work for state employment, and I have a successful career in that, and it's continuing to grow. I'm looking at, perhaps, fingers crossed, it's really difficult right now, as I'm sure as a lot of people know, to buy a house pretty soon, which 7 years ago, that wasn't even on the plate. That was not an option. I didn't have the money. I didn't have the credit. I had nothing to do that with. But after so much hard work, dedication to taking care of myself and playing those cards the best I can, and definitely have felt resentment, definitely have felt what you're talking about, like, so bitter some days, like that was what I have to do. So feel it, but just don't live in it. Don't stay in it, and keep moving forward, trying to rebuild whatever it is, because that was not in my plan. And I'm telling you, it's been a long rebuild. It's been a long rebuild, but it's going in a wonderful direction. And I'm looking forward to so many more things that I know are going to happen that are good. And there'll be cards that get dealt that I don't plan on. Of course, that's just life happening. But at least I have tools, and I can recognize what's happening, and better suited to cope with that, because I've already experienced turbulence and unpredicted catastrophic things happen, and I know what to do to take care of myself in that process, and to continue to build a good life for myself regardless. And I that's something I learned from someone like my Nautilus in life. He's like, you don't have to have wealth to live well. He's like, it's not required to live well. And I loved that. And I didn't get it at first when he was telling me that. But what he meant was, you can surround yourself with beautiful things that don't necessarily have to be expensive. They can just be well made, for example. If you like nice things, your home can be clean and in order, and it doesn't have to be big. It can just be clean and in order. Your car doesn't have to be new. It can be well functioning. So you can live a life that's well managed, that's comfortable, while you work towards improving your circumstances. Because I think there's it's definitely a temptation to stay in the comfort. If it's like, okay, I'm scared. I don't want to make a change because it is comfortable, even though I kind of want maybe a nicer house. Maybe I do want a newer car. These nice luxuries in life that we are definitely entitled to pursue and shouldn't feel guilty for wanting nice things for ourselves if that's the case. So not to be stalemated in comfort, but say like, okay, this is nice. I appreciate this. Is there more growth? Is there something else I can be doing to add to the richness of my life, whatever that is? And then go for it.
Well said. I think that's absolutely true. And that helps me too to hear it, because you can never hear it, I think, too many times. But yeah, I absolutely think, someone once said, when you hit rock bottom, that's when you can kind of push against and propel yourself back up. So, sometimes you do need to hit bottom to propel yourself back up and reboot your life, and maybe in a better direction, which seems to be happening for you right now, because you have a book published that's out in retailers, and this is the first of a two-parter. So, where can if our listeners are interested or know somebody who they think would be interested, where can they find Goode-Oliver-Dooley and the Palace of Keepers?
Definitely Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, I believe Walmart, Target, all the major retailers, Books A Million. Let's see, there's like WH Smith, Waterstones, they all carry it. That's the first part. The second book, which I just signed contract for last Monday, so that's finally been negotiated. Thank you. Oh gosh, it's such a long, arduous process, I have to say. I can never get over it. That is now slated for September release, and so that'll be Amazon and Barnes and Nobles. It's a different publisher, so I got a different publisher to take it on. So I don't know if it'll have as many outlets yet, but it will for sure be available at those major ones, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles.
Okay, and what will be the title of the second one?
Second one is Goode-Oliver-Dooley and the Quest to Save Hobcombe, which is the name of the palace that they live in.
Oh, okay. All right. So, and that will be out, you said this September 2022.
September 2022. Yeah. And that's Suicide Awareness Month. So I was working that out with the publishers, trying to get that to be the target. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Well, maybe we'll have you back then when that in September when the book comes out.
Oh, I'd love that. Anytime, please. I would love that.
Where can our listeners, I guess, find you? Because I know you said where they can find the book. Do you have a website or anything they can find you?
Yep, certainly. My personal website is www.gerrad-r-bohl.com. And I also have, of course, Twitter and Instagram. It's at gerrad-r-bohl. I have a Facebook page, all those things that will encapsulate the books as I produce them and, publish them out there. So, yeah, and then I'll put links to the various podcasts that I'm on, people I talk with. So this one I can put there as well, and share it definitely so that it's accessible. But yeah, that's where you can find me. And I'm pretty responsive too. If you want to reach out, anyone wants to reach out to me and say hi.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, Gerrad. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure and a treat. I really appreciate it.
I encourage because I did read the book. And so I encourage our listeners out there, if you're interested, please go find Gerrad's book at the retailers he mentioned and give it a read. Or if you have children or, know of some children who you think might enjoy it or benefit from it, it's definitely a fantastical world that Gerrad built. And you listeners can also follow our parent company, Victims and Villains, over at victimsandvillains.net, where you can find Victims and Villains Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, and YouTube links. You can also find movie reviews, podcasts, and movie resources. You can also find the mental health resource library over at victimsandvillains.net, which is, as we discussed in this episode, such an important resource for people who don't have a Nautilus who they can lean on and gain support from, because sometimes that can be more difficult to find, and it's so very important. So please, if you are in need of that, please check out the mental health resource library at victimsandvillains.net to find some place to start and to get the help that you need. That will do it for us for this episode. We wish you the best. And remember, talk nerd, talk hope, and speak nothing else.